Hello everyone, it's Akisiel here, and today I'll be doing the final part of my reaction to I Can't Believe It's Not Magic, Technocratic Union Mage Lore by TheBurgerkrieg. On the last part of the reaction, I found out that, yeah, the New World Order was not hyperbole, and them being fascist was also not hyperbole. They are literally fascists, which came as a surprise. And we continuing with the different conventions, and this one the Progenitors looks like, which I have a guess what they're about based on their name, and that they potentially might have been in the start of the technocracy. But without further ado, let's get into it.
Progenitors are in the business of reality deviance. And what I mean by that is that what they do is they actually perform reality deviance within the Technocracy, which is an organization dedicated to the stamping out of reality deviance. They are
So hypocrisy.
mad scientists, crazy researchers, on the very cutting edges, looking just how far hypertech can be stretched. And sometimes some of the things that they do actually become part of consensus. Their main expertise in all this is and always has been medical science. Victor Frankenstein is the classic archetypal progenitor, and that is not just in the sense that he was a mad scientist, but also that he literally created new life. And that's something the progenitors spend a whole lot of time and energy on. They're not trying to necessarily upgrade humanity through cybernetics like Iteration X is, but to make it anew entirely. Which isn't to say they don't use cybernetics at all, also, it's just that that's not the thing they mainly prefer to do. And much like Victor Frankenstein, they have unleashed a whole slew of horrors onto the world with all their failed projects. They used to not.
I wonder how many cryptids they might have been inadvertently responsible for. I also wonder if well, it's probably likely they're also the ones who made the Terminators that the technocracy uses.
Not care about any form of ethics in any way, shape, or form ever. Just destroying human life and limb as they saw fit just to see what they could come up with. And it causes a lot of damage to people and society. Forget like eugenics and phrenology, although that certainly is stuff that they came up with. I'm talking zombie outbreaks. Fake human creatures that are performing slave labor in deep space. Man-made horrors beyond your comprehension.
So there are so basically skinwalkers performing space slavery.
And in spite of their allegedly very good security, a lot of progenitor creations have managed to escape their labs and find their way to the front lines, causing irreparable damage to consensus that had the NWO hyperventilating for decades. This is until one day, perhaps due to the dimensional anomaly, the progenitors' internal money people went, nuh-uh, and majorly reshuffled the whole organization to focus away from the science and genetic engineering of let's just see what's going to happen, and more onto preparing humanity for the real crises that are coming. And also ideally working with other conventions to stop these crises from coming up altogether. I'm talking climate change here, by the way. That's one of the main ones that they have directed their efforts at combating. None of the other conventions have changed so drastically and so quickly. Well, I mean, maybe except for the Void Engineers, but that really depends on the timeline, I guess. And many of the old school progenitors, and those who hope to become like.
And I'm going to guess that the Void Engineers, given the naming, are the ones who are probably responsible for all that, like, like space travel and that stuff going on, and space stations. And potentially as well some of the stuff that's used in their interactions with aliens.
Them and not very happy about this. The whole convention is structured a lot more like research universities than anything else. It's rather non-authoritarian. People are encouraged to be individuals. They're actually deeply interwoven with the global scientific and academic elite, which gives them ample opportunity to detect anyone who might be on the verge of awakening to the secrets of enlightened science. And to suss out whether university hierarchy is structured like the progenitors, or whether the progenitors hierarchy is structured like that of a university, is sort of a chicken and egg type situation, which a lot of progenitors could actually tell you which was first. It was the 3D printer. And the only reason these changes could be implemented at all within the convention is because the progenitors actually make a ton of money for the technocracy. They hold a lot of medical and other technological patents, and while they are of course not entirely self-funded given how expensive much of their research is, a lot of their funding actually comes internally through research grants. And all the money people had to do to refocus the efforts of the entire convention was to not give the money to psychopaths. Although where those money people got their conscience from is a kind of a mystery, really. That doesn't mean they don't still have a ton of interesting projects going on. They have an underwater research station manned almost exclusively by dolphins and octopuses, although then I suppose it would be dolphined and octopused. They're involved in various de-extinction efforts, including fucking dinosaurs, various interpretations of them. Neanderthals too, they...
You know, it's kind of funny, like, the whole thing of them trying to bring back the dinosaurs, partly because when you look at the remains of certain creatures, there's like, if you don't have the knowledge of, well, it's like certain bits of knowledge, things can be wild. Like there's a particular one where someone just took a hippo skull and showed what they thought a hippo would look like if you just tried to reconstruct it based only off of how the skull looks, and they made this horrifying dinosaur-looking abomination.
They made Neanderthals. Apparently very nice, very kind people. They are battling death itself, which I of course think is very cool. Oh, and did I mention they're building the actual literal Avengers? Yeah, the progenitors are trying to make superheroes. Like, that's how they think they're gonna solve a lot of problems, by introducing superheroes to the world. But these days, their efforts truly are focused on making more people more healthy by developing novel medical treatments. Or rather, introducing those treatments and medicines into the consensus, because most of the actual work of creating them has already happened. Now it's about actually applying it to reality, which can be rather difficult in the field, given that there's a lot of distrust of big pharma around the world, not to mention consensus fracturing in general. So they've had to become a little tricky in their approaches to certain communities. One thing they do now is they pretend to be New Age medicine. You know all the stories where the parents chose not to pursue cancer treatment for their child, but through prayers and faith, the child healed anyway? Yeah, unless a chorister was involved, it was not prayer that did it. It was a snake oil salesman that gave them some kind of magical thing that they would rub on their child's forehead, and that snake oil then contained progenitor-developed nanomachines that went into the child's body and killed the cancer. Now, this does create a little bit...
You know, I'd be disappointed and also surprised if someone hasn't already gotten the idea to just say that the progenitors would be responsible for just a Senator Armstrong-esque figure showing up in World of Darkness.
Bit of a conundrum that sort of illustrates the divides within the technocracy pretty well. Because not only is that, like, clear reality deviance that violates consensus and invites paradox, it also, because it happened, like, sneakily, reinforces the idea that faith healing can work in people's minds. I mean, they literally saw it happen, and that's bad for the type of rationalistic consensus the Technocratic Union is trying to build. On the other hand, what, are you gonna let the kid die? It is the mission of the technocracy to protect humanity from the predations of superstitionism. What could more strongly embody that mission than saving the life of a child from the predations of its parents' superstitious beliefs? One of the major projects dedicated to
So one of those moments when the technocracy's mission comes into conflict with itself.
Reconciling that divide is probably that the nanites that were given to the child may have included certain agents that also restructured its brain and made it believe in technocratic consensus. This is usually done in tandem with NWO efforts because developing those kinds of nanites is much more resource intensive and they specialize in the kind of social manipulation to make that happen anyway. But the progenitors are in fact trying to science pill people. Some common foci that are very popular with progenitors is the development and testing of novel scientific theories. Now you might say, Burger, isn't what the progenitors do as scientists also will working because that is how the science works even for progenitor technocrats, and isn't that kind of an inherent violation that exists in contradiction to the very way of how science works and how science is done? So can these people really call themselves scientists if they know that the research that they do doesn't work the way science does? And the answer to that is no. You just don't understand enlightened science. They also have generously equipped laboratories full of expensive gear and staff that works tirelessly. The whole vast field of experimentation, whether that be sort of surgery, CRISPR grafting, or chemical synthesis, anything you can pick.
Oh, by the way, for those who don't know what CRISPR is, it's how they do gene editing.
Picture people doing in a lab could potentially be a focus. Much like the belief that just having enough funding can get the job done. Controversially, a lot of especially progenitors believe in discredited pseudoscientific theories to work their enlightened science. Those are part of their personal paradigm. Especially older and more influential ones.
Oh no, I hope he's not gonna say that they're flat earthers or progenitors.
So in spite of the convention's frequent attempts to bring these people into the present, there is something deeply idiosyncratic of how magic and enlightened science work, and many of these people are used to working under conditions that do adhere to their personal worldview far away from the front lines. And they have name recognition, achievements, contacts that go back a long time within the progenitors. Keeping them in check is a project in its own right. Some projector methodologies include the applied sciences, an extremely varied group of individuals who share experience and resources with each other to field test various progenitor projects out there on the front lines. The facade engineers who can actually trace their roots back all the way to the Kosian society in ancient Egypt and who work on developing new forms of humanity based on the human blueprint. The E in facade, by the way, stands for eugenics. It is, in fact, an acronym. And the pharmacopeists, who trace their roots back to different parts of the Kosian Circle, who used to be the more rationally minded herbalists and alchemists, but are now modern-day pharmacists and apothecaries. Which, you know, if you do go to pharmacies, there is a certain degree of magic about those places. I have always found it fascinating. You go in there, you give them a slip of paper, and they come back with some substance that will heal you. It will change the way your body works. And I don't know what goes on in the back there, but I would really love to see it. The Syndicate make...
You know, yeah, when you do put it that way, it is very funny. Also, given how he's dressed now that you saw him at the Syndicate, I have a distinct feeling like this is gonna be reminiscent of spy movie stuff like, say, James Bond and Austin Powers.
Makes money. No, seriously, they make it. That's what they do. They make the money. They're not just...
Oh, so like they run the Federal Reserve.
Big business. They are the bigger fish in the pool that big business only ever gets to see the vague outline of. So yeah, the Technocratic Union requires an unfathomable amount of funding to do what it does. And it's the Syndicate's job to bring in that cash supply. They manage the Union's assets and fund its projects, which you may think gives them a huge amount of power. And that is entirely correct. It's very true. They are extremely powerful. While they don't exactly dominate the other conventions, especially if the dimensional anomaly occurred, they will be the most powerful among them. This is because they are much more earthbound than the other conventions. They had very few horizon constructs in the first place and even kept a lot of management directly on Earth. The Syndicate thrives in human society. They have obscene, unspeakable amounts of wealth. They don't need space stations. They have everything they could possibly ever want right here. So when the dimensional anomaly destroyed most of the Technocracy's space infrastructure, they are the convention that lost the least. If rebuilding efforts are underway, they are currently dishing out copious amounts of Skrilla, which would push them to capacity in their ability to generate cash flow, but also put them in an extremely powerful position at a point where the Technocracy is at its weakest. Holding the purse strings in moments of transformation gives you the ability to set up a lot of systemic factors that are going to play in your favor way into the future. So many among the conventions feel like the Syndicate is, especially right now, too powerful. Especially for a group that so often conflicts with the ideals of the Technocracy. You see all the hierarchy problems in the technology that I mentioned earlier, where being a blood-sucking psychopath is the easiest way to the top? Nowhere is this worse than within the Syndicate. Seriously, especially for unenlightened personnel, for sleepers, and a lot of extraordinary citizens, being in the Syndicate, it's an extremely toxic culture. Going so far that the Mage Splat books say explicitly that the Technocracy has like zero tolerance for sexual harassment, except for the Syndicate.
Oh, so that kind of toxic workplace. So the Syndicate runs Riot Games, got it.
The Syndicate can have a little bit of sexual harassment as a treat. After all, what is the point of being powerful if you're not going to be using that power for your own personal enjoyment? Yeah, that kind of like slimy ass bullshit is the whole MO of the Syndicate. And they get away with it because they control the money, and their entire ethos is to make as much money as possible, no matter the cost. To that end, not only are they big in all of the legitimate corporate conglomerates of the world, they also control organized crime, global cartels. Yeah,
So, in other words, all the just grimy stuff that big business does, like, for example, what Nestle did in Africa regarding baby formula, is in World Darkness explained as it was a syndicate. I kind of wonder then, well, actually, since they're so absorbed with their own like self-enrichment, it also makes sense that they might probably try to justify this stuff by saying, oh, all this stuff that is shown to have a detrimental effect on humanity, including, you know, say making climate change worse, because big oil would say that the money generated by these efforts, it balances it out, and will result in the most good for the most people. Then again, they're also holding the purse string, so I suppose that the rest of the technocracy just kind of has to deal with it.
that spaceship you're flying in, El Chapo paid for it. They are also one of the Union's most gaping security holes, especially through the famous Special Projects Division, which worked with the conglomerate Pentex of Werewolf the Apocalypse fame, very evil corporation, before the Special Projects Division was dissolved. And yet, somehow, even though the Special Projects Division no longer exists, unfathomable amounts of money are being sent to the technocracy for things that it does. And, like, not even management knows what's going on, but hey, it's free cash. It's for this kind of shit that NWO forensic auditors love to give the Syndicate a little slap on the fingers when the higher-ups deem it necessary, aka when they can get away with it. And in a sort of ironic twist, the Syndicate is the only convention of the technocracy that has actively gotten worse over the past few decades. It used to be home to various economic theories and models and ideas of how business should be run, but with the rise of dog-eat-dog neoliberal capitalism, the logic of it is morally righteous when it generates a lot of profit has brought the Syndicate's worst qualities to the fore. They seriously dropped the ball in Russia and a lot of other post-Soviet states with the whole communism-capitalism conflict, just completely folding the cards on the communist members of the Syndicate for the sake of personal power play and internal politicking, and then ruining the Russian economy with shock therapy introduction of neoliberal capitalism. That's a historical fact, by the way. All the poverty that you see in Russia, that only happened after the Soviet Union was dismantled and had all of its stuff being sold off to extremely rich people. Before the fall of the Soviet Union,
Yep, that's how the current reigning oligarchs in Russia ended up with a lot of the wealth and stranglehold over parts of the economy that they have now.
Russians were eating the best out of all of the people in the world. And the people who got all those state assets through their political connections are known as the oligarchs today. However, even within the Syndicate, a lot of individuals, especially of the more theory-inclined side of understanding how the magic of money works, have been calling for a little bit of a restructuring, and it all ultimately comes down to the idea of consensus viability. Humans contribute to the consensus in roughly equal amounts. They believe things, and then those things are real, and the technocracy's approach has been to obviously make it so the consensus they want people to believe in is one that is appealing to those people. To put it in economic terms, regular people need to see a good return on investment into the consensus. Otherwise, they'll just choose a different reality to invest in, which is something that's happening with a lot of disgruntled people these days. Thus, the fact of the socialist ownership of the consensus turns out to be one of those irrefutable realities that the Syndicate must adapt to. At least such is the theory. The people who are proposing it are very much in the minority. Because of course, the Syndicate continues to recruit primarily people who are ruthless and devoid of compassion. They value self-motivation, ingenuity, the grind set. One of the things they're also very traditionally liberal in is the fact that they have no hard new life, old life divide, because usually when you ascend into the Syndicate, retaining your old business contacts is very fucking useful. You don't want to enter the business org and immediately lose all your assets. That would be a huge waste. The idea of pulling yourself up by your bootstraps is deeply ingrained into the notions of how they view magic. Syndicate technocrats often master the prime sphere, which they understand as being called primal utility. And to them, the most perfect representation of primal utility is money. Because much like primal utility, money is essentially an unseen, invisible, abstract force that can sometimes manifest in like bills of cash, but usually just sort of exists out in the ether and can make pretty much anything happen. Like seriously, money is the greatest reality shaping power in existence. Which, come to speak of it, like a wad of cash is a great quintessence storage type deal for technocrats of this particular orientation. They are the ones working on making the entire world cashless, which I, as a cash kind of guy, really fucking hate. But it makes money more abstract and thus more like prime. Really, the whole convention is the most mystical.
Also, making society cashless also allows money to be exchanged with even less barriers, just by virtue that you don't have to deal with, the physical little cash, which is a whole thing in economic theory on its own, because it facilitates the rate of transactions and all that.
Of all of the ones within the Technocratic Union. They even have this ironic understanding of themselves as being people who do magic. They call themselves the Magic Men. In terms of foci of how they channel their magic, of course, the most common is the famous Art of Desire, which is something you may have heard of. Visualizing things in order to make them happen. Not very technological, as you can see. They also use marketing, arcane models of hypereconomics, power dynamics, weird, terrible fucking psychological manipulation. Seriously, these people love gaslighting. Crypto is something that they sometimes use as
Sounds like they'd give the New World Order a run for their money then.
a focus that they tried to introduce to the consensus, but people rejected it, so they failed to introduce it. The concept of, like, the team having a bunch of eggheads that will just figure it out when you tell them to do it, that's a very common focus to manifest the magic of a syndicalist. They make the impossible happen not because they have the ability to, but because the mage believes that they can. And then, of course, just having influence matters, knowing the right people, being able to make a phone call that'll break reality. Sometimes they will do outright mystical rituals, usually involving, like, the domination and exploitation of people. Sense of style and panache, similar to what the NWO does, just with more body hair. Cocaine and every other kind of upper, which gives them a lot of similarity to the mystical tradition of the Sahajiya. Probably some of them do nofap. Every insane idea can be a focus. If you ever do find technology in their magic, it's gonna be stuff like ATMs. Never any of those weird sort of hypertech devices, because who needs that kind of shit when you have money? Some of the classic Syndicate methodologies include the Enforcers, also known as the Hollow Men, who reconcile the fact that ultimately all of the value that money has is entirely imaginary by making sure that there are very real consequences to people who do not pay their bills. The financiers, or as Alex Jones would call them, the globalists, because they are the worldwide network of all the big banks and big business, interlinking all of these various organizations to create a true.
Which actually, since he mentioned the whole thing of, the value of money being imaginary, there is a distinction to be made between money and currency. Now, I don't remember which was which, but one of them is the cash that we use to buy goods and services. That has no real use by itself. Well, technically, I guess someone could probably use like a $1 bill to wipe their ass or something. But what I mean is that just generally speaking, by itself doesn't really have value. And the other one, and it describes things that can be exchanged for goods and services, but also has value in and of itself. Like, for example, a sack of potatoes. You could trade that to someone for something, or you could just use it yourself, cook it, eat it, plant some, whatever you're gonna do with it. It has use to you other than just for trading. I just don't remember which term referred to which one, but yeah.
Truly globalized economy, and media control, which has a lot of jurisdiction friction with the NWO much of the time, and though it is also its job to reinforce technocratic global consensus, very often what it primarily does is reinforce syndicate consensus. The Void Engineers stare into the abyss, and the abyss does its thing to them. It really depends on what abyss it specifically is. They do different things, the various kinds of abysses. Sometimes...
Actually, I think about it, the abyss may not just be space, but also be things like, for example, well, since the technocracy has been getting involved in things like the underworld and stuff.
Sometimes it's literal, sometimes it's metaphorical. Point is, they have seen things you people wouldn't believe. Let's face it, this is the most interesting of the conventions. Like, yeah, okay, the others are all cool and interesting, but these guys go to space. To the space of the space area. They're the space force of the Technocratic Union. Okay, maybe that's not strictly speaking all that they do, but space is in practical terms where they are located most heavily because of it's pretty big. The space is big. And they don't just explore conventional space as we think of it, as seen in the popular television show Carl Sagan's Cosmos, but the magical realms of wild spirits that is the Middle Umbra, also known as biospheric space. The abstract realm of the High Umbra, filled with lofty concepts and intellectual ideals, also known as ensemble space. Entropic space, the underworld, full of the dead, which once again I will refer you to my Wraith video if you want to learn more about that.
Oh, I was right.
Digital web, a newly emerging sort of space that is somehow similar. It draws parallels to biospheric space, but it's also different, and the very concept of space doesn't make as much sense in it. But then you see all the parallels of internet cables being interconnected with each other, and the mushrooms, the global mycelial network sending information like neurons, or whatever energies bind the infinite realms of the Mid-Lumbra together.
If the internet is a plane of existence, I would not want to go there. It would be like the warp in 40K, basically, I imagine. Because it's just everything is there.
Subspace or ether space, which is kind of like an alternate dimension of regular space, and it's full of magic. Here, the various planets of our solar system map to the shard realms, which each represent one of the spheres of magic. The deep universe beyond the asteroid belt, where things get really weird really quickly, and the farther out you go, the more weird they get. Alternate timelines, one of the particularly messy exploration endeavors. Some are mapping the deep oceans of Earth, and there is some truly scary shit in there. The same is true about the...
Which, funny thing actually, if I remember correctly, we currently know more about space than about the Earth's deep ocean. Which is both fascinating and horrifying.
The last remaining true wildernesses on this planet. Think of the Amazon, the Antarctic, the deep Siberian taiga. Things are different there. Reality is just sort of absent. And they explore these places not just to see what's there for the sake of curiosity, but...
You know, reality being, well, as he puts it, absent there, makes sense considering that these are places where people don't really live there. So what reality would be there would be the objective reality, right? Like the part of reality that governs things like vampires and werewolves existing.
But to understand them and become better able to protect humanity from them. That is the true purpose of the Void Engineers, to protect the borders of consensus and make sure nothing weird crosses over. Which ultimately tends to come down to just making sure that nothing crosses over them at all, for any reason. So while we do think of them as more space-based, actually a lot of Void Engineer jobs are based on Earth. And whether they constitute the majority or perhaps even the entirety of the
I wonder how many sea monsters coming out of the abyssal pelagic zone they deal with.
Convention really heavily depends on how you play the dimensional anomaly in your chronicle. Because for obvious reasons, it is the convention most affected by it. If it's a severe, ongoing dimensional anomaly, they're going to be very strict, tightly organized, a highly military organization, focusing on Earth mostly, perhaps trying to re-establish contact with extra-dimensional assets. If the dimensional anomaly didn't happen, they will be much more utopian, going out there, trying to find the new, the incredible wonders of the universe, supporting the vast space-based infrastructure that all the conventions utilize. The default is kind of in the middle, where they're still reeling from heavy losses and trying to sort of restructure and refocus themselves as a more pragmatic, a little less idealistic organization. They're kind of like Starfleet and Star Trek, where they have like a military structure, but fundamentally understand themselves to be more of a civilian organization, where hierarchy is not necessarily a religion, but a matter of being, you know, practical. They'd probably be in the process of rebuilding as much as possible of what was lost during the dimensional anomaly, and also looking at how the dimensional anomaly changed the various other dimensions. They are perhaps the most alienated, haha pun intended, of the conventions, what with the nature of their mission usually taking place far away from the front lines. Many of them deal with aliens, be they like umbral spirits or actual aliens, more often than they do with regular people. The people that they are out there trying to protect. Many Void Engineers actually kind of see Earth as a lost cause and are considering just leaving, just fucking off, whether the rest of humanity follows along or not. They see consensus more like a cyst around this very particular place in the universe, and what it does is it protects the narrow minds of regular people, and sometimes, depending on who you fucking ask, the narrow minds of technocratic leadership. But it needs to be cut open. The pus needs to like drain out of it so it can heal. They tend to recruit, obviously from astronauts, which pretty much everyone who has ever been to space, the people you see on the news, all the famous astronauts, they're all extraordinary citizens of the Void Engineers. But that does make for a rather narrow pool. There's not actually all that many astronauts out there, so they also look for all kinds of military types, especially Navy and Air Force people. The Void Engineer Marine Corps is actually the first line of defense against all types of alien incursions, and they are quite formidable. Scientists, they're like those with an obvious focus on, like, you know, astrophysicists, biologists, geographers, but really all kinds. Engineers, also, very obviously, it's in the name. And this very particular type of person, in modern days most commonly found among artists, who were just sort of born into the wrong era. Because there's really not that much left to explore within the bounds of generally agreed upon consensus. But these people are just born explorers. They need to go out there to explore in order to be happy. In the face of the hard collectivism of Iteration X and the NWO, and the decadent individualism of the Syndicate and the Progenitors, the Void Engineers seek to walk a middle path where you need to adhere to certain strictures that are there for a good reason, but are otherwise encouraged to be yourself. With the grand exception that almost nobody can still be in touch with their old life. Something pretty much unique to the Void Engineers is that extraordinary citizens who are not enlightened mages can rise to pretty much any rank and position. In other conventions, this does not, like, very rarely one will get up to middle management. Enlightenment or no, if you're a Void Engineer and you have seen what a Void Engineer has seen, you are part of the blessed and cursed few. They are considered the most extraordinary of the extraordinary citizens because they have witnessed the kinds of things that enlightened members of other conventions cannot even imagine. Which leads me to a cool tidbit, actually. The Void Engineers have, like, therapists on staff, psychologists, that they give people actual sort of psychotherapy.
Yeah, I'd imagine, considering all the weird stuff they probably see daily, not to mention, well, the fact that given, well, so there's first the weird stuff, like all of that comes from places is where consensus isn't really heavily enforced. Of course, there's also just, you know, the aliens, whether they be like more traditional, like aliens we think of it, or the spirits that he mentioned.
Slots of which are popular with members of all kinds of conventions, because I'm talking actual real therapy, not like social processing, attunement, magical brainwashing. Real, honest to God, let's actually talk about your issues and help you deal with the stuff that you've experienced type psychotherapy. When it comes to foci, a Void Engineer focus is rarely going to be subtle and will usually involve all kinds of hyper-technology and weird alien shit. But it doesn't really matter if it's vulgar, because unless you're talking about a very specific subset of agents that operates surgically on the front lines to get rid of stuff that slipped the net, they're way beyond the bounds of consensus anyway. So they get to use every kind of technology that they can dream up, especially of the strange hypertech variety. Spaceships, sensors, satellites, weird astronomical models, and sort of high-end holographic orreries. There's a lot more freedom too in the kinds of cosmological models that you get to subscribe to than you might expect. And a lot of room for experimentation with all the weird shit that exists out there. If you find this strange mineral that cannot be found on Earth somewhere out there, and you really believe that using it to fuel your spaceship will make your spaceship go faster than light, your spaceship will go faster than light. Some of the rather more conventional foci.
It sounds like while being part of the Void Engineers would be very mentally taxing because of the stuff they deal with regularly, it also sounds like it's potentially just be really fun because you just get to do whatever in terms of, you know, the level of hypertech you're allowed to use, because they're past the bounds of consensus most of the time.
include education and training, by which I mean like the belief that you have learned this protocol, you have learned how to deal with this situation, and thus you can make the magic happen that is required to deal with the situation. Spacesuits, of course, and all their fancy gimmicks, all other types of cool astronaut fashion. Yes, I am indeed naked underneath this. And let's not discount the good old sailor superstitions. Management may not like it, but the fact remains that if you adhere to certain rules and protocols and perform certain seemingly meaningless rituals before departure, your voyage will be blessed with good luck. Void engineer methodologies include the Border Corps Division, which maintains outposts just on the other side of the gauntlet of our reality to monitor for potential incursions and fight them before they can cross over at all. Sometimes that means just buying the rest of the technocracy a few more minutes to prepare. The Earth Frontier Division, which focuses on unlocking the secrets of the various unexplored areas of Earth. And the Pan-Dimensional Corps that has all the spaceships with which they go to far-off distant galaxies. And, not to cut this unnecessarily short or anything, that's it. That is the technocracy. Obviously, there's still a fuck ton left of discuss, but with all of my World of Darkness lore videos, the point is really to help you get a sense of the basics so you can understand all the details as you go do your own exploration of this immense setting. And always remember, much of the stuff you'll read is not set in stone, so if you like it, use it. If you don't like it, don't use it. Thank you very much for watching.
That kind of reminds me a lot of how Warhammer 40k is as well. Where it's like there's an absolutely massive amount of lore there, and you can, with certain things, you can kind of just pick and choose because a lot of the lore is presented from the viewpoint of people in the setting, people whose knowledge may not necessarily be perfect.
Watching, like, comment, subscribe, share this to your relevant communities. You know what? Fuck it, spam them. Don't actually spam them, don't do it. Consider supporting me on Patreon or Subscribestar, buying some of my merchandise or my short story collection. Maybe soon I'll get to say buy my novel too, who knows? And in that spirit, I wear this outfit just for the recording, just so you know, when I wear an outfit, you know I record over several days. I'm not wearing the same outfit over several days. I'm just putting it on for the recording. And see you around, cunts.
Well, that was fun to watch, and I hope you guys enjoyed watching with me. Yeah, I'm definitely gonna look more into World of Darkness lore because I don't know, I just enjoy learning about settings and all the stuff that the writers put into them. And oh boy, similar to 40k, World of Darkness definitely looks like it has a ton of stuff to keep me occupied with. But until next time, ta-ta!